Chapter 9. Final Day. Walking up to the open gates, Fei Yin's eyes flickered upwards to the plaque above the entrance, where 3 large characters were written in golden paint. Wan Baodian, the Hall of Infinite Treasures, was the name of the alchemist guild that owned the building, a name that was known throughout the empire and commanded much respect. Returning her gaze to the front, Fei Yin waved happily to the pair of guards standing sentry there, who returned the gesture as she walked past. The first thing that she noticed upon entering the building was the smell, a mixture of pungent herbs and furnace smoke. The odor was incredibly potent, but not unpleasant, and she smiled when breathing it in. As she made her way through the familiar corridors, she exchanged greetings with the junior apprentices that she was acquainted with, as they ran errands for their superiors, or she would stop and peer into one of the many rooms to watch the senior alchemists working at the furnaces. The process fascinated her, especially the part where the alchemist controlled the fires with their magic, changing its temperature, shape, or color to suit their needs, and she would have stayed to watch if she could. Unfortunately, today was not a day for leisurely observations, and she reluctantly dragged herself away. Finally, she reached her intended destination, a room deep in the heart of the building and far away from the paths of most casual visitors. Gently, she knocked on the closed door, then upon receiving a summons, opened it and stepped inside. Her already smiling face lit up even more upon seeing the room's occupants. Standing to the side of a large cushioned couch was Ding Tian, dressed in the grass-green robes of an apprentice alchemist. He was scribbling down notes onto a sheet of paper, while on the couch sat 2 men. One of the men wore the burgundy robes of an alchemist, with the golden trims marking him out as a grand master of his craft. This man was Yi, family name Sum, and he was Ding Tian's master. His clean-shaven and wrinkle-free face made him look to be in his early 30s, but Fei Yin knew that you needed to add another 0 to that number to come close to his actual age. Right now, Yi was taking the pulse of the other man on the couch and calling out his observations that Ding Tian was scrupulously taking down. Contrasting sharply with Yi's youthful, vibrant appearance, the other man looked every bit the sickly patient that he was. With a gaunt, ragged face and a frighteningly thin frame, the man looked to be on death's door, with the noble clothes that he wore looking like the elaborate burial garments of the soon-to-be buried. Yet for all the man's apparent frailty, when he did turn to look at Fei Yin, it was with steel in his eyes. Fei Yin made her greetings, and the sickly man made to get up, but was held in place by Yi.
"We're not done yet. Ding Tian, take Lady Li to the garden. I'll send Lord Pang over when we are finished."
Obeying his master's words, Ding Tian put down the paper and brush before escorting Fei Yin out.
Are you kidding? There is no way the 7th prince is going to marry that conniving brat,
shouted Fei Yin, the disbelief evident in her voice. Ding Tian shrugged.
What choice does he have? The emperor himself decreed the marriage.
But she tried to poison Huanyang, and the prince knows it,
protested Fei Yin, with incredulity at the idea of her favorite male lead marrying the villainess.
He also knows that the marriage is needed to secure the northern borders,
replied Ding Tian with another shrug. Fei Yin was about to snap back a retort when a voice came from across the garden.
"My dears, it's only a book,"
said Pang Xiao as he entered the garden, his sickly frame shuffling forward with the help of a walking stick. Under normal circumstances, having her favorite series of novels trivialized would have immediately drawn Fei Yin's ire. Xiao, however, was the exception. Hurriedly, the two young people rushed forward and helped the frail old man settle into a nearby seat, beside which was a small table with a Wei keyboard already set up. Making himself comfortable, Xiao turned to Ding Tian.
Will you be joining us?
Asked the older man, to which Ding Tian nodded enthusiastically. Then along with Fei Yin, they took the seats opposite Xiao. In theory, the game was deceptively simple, being played on a grid-like board, with each player using either black or white pebbles. The goal of the game was to control as much of the board as possible, with bonus points being awarded for capturing your opponent's pebbles. However, to play it well, one needed strategy, foresight, adaptability, and even psychology. Despite her tender age, Fei Yin excelled at the game, with the seasoned players in her father's army often accusing her of bullying them, albeit in a good-natured manner. In fact, with the exception of her father, Fei Yin had never met another player who could consistently beat her. That was until she had met Pang Xiao. To put it simply, the man was fantastic, his every move taken with confidence and satisfaction, as if victory was merely a formality. No matter what strategy Fei Yin adopted, or whatever obscure sequence she tried, Xiao would just smile gently before expertly dismantling her well-laid plans. Today, however, things were going to be different, for Fei Yin had teamed up with Ding Tian, another victim of Xiao's unfair bullying, and together they were going to end his reign of terror. Or at least that was the plan, a plan that had lasted exactly 20 moves before it started falling apart. What started off as the perfect partnership, where Fei Yin's aggressive style was being tempered by Ding Tian's meticulous planning and eye for detail, had quickly deteriorated into a shouting match, as Xiao anticipated their every move with impossible accuracy, cornering them at every turn and controlling ever larger parts of the board until finally securing victory at the 50th move. Immediately, the two young people demanded a rematch, a demand that Xiao happily obliged, and 6 more games were played, with each game ending quicker than the one before it, as if Xiao knew what moves they were going to make before they made them. Finally, the vanquished youths slumped on the table in utter defeat, while Xiao leaned back and smiled in self-satisfaction. Suddenly, Fei Yin's ears perked up, and she shot back up to a sitting position to stare at a spot behind Xiao. The man walked steadily, his every step measured and balanced, his posture upright. As he got progressively closer, Fei Yin's face darkened before finally becoming an annoyed frown as he stopped just behind Xiao, his large muscular frame looming over the frail old man like a tiger would its prey. Turning in his seat, Xiao looked up and smiled at the newcomer.
How? Will you be joining us?
He asked cheerfully. Ignoring the question, Pang Hao looked down at his father with undisguised contempt before he spoke.
Grandpa told me to bring you home.
The curt words would have been rude if spoken to a stranger, let alone one's own parent. But Hao said them without any hint of inhibition. His rudeness towards his own father infuriated Fei Yin, and the angry retort she was about to unleash was only stopped when Xiao turned back to her with the jovial smile still on his lips.
I'm afraid that we will have to call this a day. Thanks for the game, and good luck with tomorrow's tournament.
Fei Yin was silent for a moment, as her righteous anger towards Hao warred with her fondness with Zhao. Eventually, the latter prevailed, and ignoring Hao, she gave Xiao a pleasant farewell. As the father and son left the garden, Fei Yin stared hard at Hao's back, suddenly looking forward to the upcoming tournament and the chance to teach the man a lesson in filial piety. Xianxia, better known as Aunt Lin, took a sip of her tea as she watched the young couple sitting at the table in front of her. Ever since their first encounter, nearly a month ago, the two of them had spent almost every day together, exploring the city's busy streets and indulging in their mutual love for exotic foods. At first, she had been weary of the strange young man with exceptional fighting skills, and had suspected that he might have been a spy from one of the rival families, a suspicion Chu Chen's mother had shared. Using her contacts within the city, the Zhang family's matriarch had looked into the youth's background and found out that he was a student of the Bleeding Sword Academy, having recently entered the city as the apprentice of a reclusive elder of the institution. As a respectable but unremarkable place of learning within Wuzhong City, the Bleeding Sword Academy had cordial, if distant, relationships with most of the local powers, and generally stayed out of the political machinations that plagued every city. This made them an unlikely candidate as spies for the enemies of the Zhang family, and nothing in Madame Zhang's investigations suggested otherwise. Even so, Xianxia had kept a close eye on the young man who had befriended her ward and was ready to take decisive action at the first sign of duplicity. Fortunately, none had appeared, and the young man had behaved exactly like someone enjoying the company of a fellow food enthusiast. A cry of outrage from the young couple's table snapped Xianxia back to the present, and she braced herself for action, only to chuckle as she saw an irate Chu Chen berating her companion as the young man smiled impishly while adopting a posture of mock submission. Chu Chen watched eagerly as the waiter arrived with their order, her mouth watering in anticipation of sampling the restaurant's mysterious special dish. However, her excitement immediately vanished as the plate was placed in front of them, and she saw the unmistakable shape of cooked insects that it contained. Turning to Mogun, she saw her companion pick up a pair of chopsticks and reach eagerly towards the plate. Yet just as the utensil was about to touch the insects, it suddenly stopped, and Mogun turned to give Chu Chen a grin that made his prank obvious. Letting out an outraged cry, the young woman picked up a handful of cooked insects and threw them at Mogun, all the while berating him for his cruelty. After a moment, Mogun held his hands up in feigned surrender before calling out to the waiter, who smiled as he came back with another plate. This time Chu Chen approached the dish tentatively, her eyes darting suspiciously between the plate and Mogun. Thankfully this time there were no more nasty surprises, and she saw nothing but a plate of deliciously cooked chicken, seasoned with fragrant spices that wafted tantalizingly up her nose. Finally, unable to resist any longer, she picked up a pair of chopsticks and dove in. She wanted to cry out in joy the moment the food touched her tongue, and only stopped because she was too busy chewing in delight. The sound of a poorly suppressed chuckle drew her attention, and she turned to see a self-satisfied smirk on Mogun's face. She wanted to give him a scolding, but to do so would mean interrupting her eating. So instead, she settled for a glare before picking up another morsel and popping it into her mouth. Picking up his own chopsticks, Mogun joined his friend, and they soon settled in to the familiar pattern of talking pleasantly between mouthfuls of food. As always, Chu Chen was impressed by her friend's breadth of knowledge and insight. By all accounts, she was a very well-educated person and could hold her own against most scholars or intellectuals. Mo Gun, however, was a match for her in almost any subject, be it the poetry of Li Bai or the historical records of Sima Qian. Her friend showed surprising depth and unique perspectives. In fact, in some things, his knowledge surpassed her own, like how much he knew about the local customs and traditions of the many provinces of the empire. For despite being only a year older than Chu Chen, he was incredibly well-traveled, as opposed to herself, who, being the scion of one of the grandest family within the empire, had her movements closely monitored and restricted. The admiration, however, ran both ways, with Mo Gun being the first to admit that she was his superior in other things, like calligraphy and mathematics. Their meal continued until, having finished their third plate of the restaurant's special dish, they decided to settle the bill and move on. The rest of the afternoon passed by with them exploring the many streets of Wuzhong City, stopping frequently at any shops or stalls that took their fancy, while all the while being chaperoned by Aunt Lin, who kept her distance but never let them out of her sight. Finally, the city's drums sounded, signaling the approach of dusk and the countdown for people to return to their own districts. With Chu Chen's lodgings being closer than Mo Gun's, they decided to head in that direction first, and it wasn't long before they arrived at the entrance to her mansion.
"Goodbye and good luck with the tournament tomorrow,"
said Mo Gun.
"You too. And don't forget your promise,"
replied Chu Chen, the hint of a challenge in her voice. Mo Gun chuckled and turned to give Aunt Lin a respectful nod, before turning on his heels to make his way back to his own lodgings. Ko Fei forced himself to remain calm as he spied the returning trio from his vantage point at the third level of the building opposite the Zhang family's mansion. Originally, he had rented the building in the hopes of using it as a convenient location for his anticipated tryst with Chu Chen. Events, however, had not played out in the way that he had hoped. It still rankled on him at how he had lost the affection of the heiress to that peasant. His fall had been subtle, with the peasant at first being just a hanger-on in Fei's rendezvous with Chu Chen. Slowly, however, the lady started paying more and more attention to the latecomer, often leaving out Fei in their conversations, or even forgetting his presence altogether. The nobleman had tried to fight back by presenting ever more extravagant gifts to Chu Chen, but the lady was infuriatingly indifferent to his lavish presence and showed much more excitement towards the exotic but lowly foods that the peasant often brought her. With the failure of his first attempt, Fei decided to change tactics. Subtly, he tried steering their conversations towards academic and intellectual matters, hoping to show up the peasant for the ignorant savage that he was, and embarrassing him in front of Chu Chen. To Fei's horror, the peasant had proven himself to be amazingly well-educated, and it was the young nobleman who found himself embarrassed, as his rival gave him intellectual beatdowns as brutal as their initial physical altercation had been. Eventually, things had gotten to the point that Lady Zhang no longer bothered inviting him to her daily excursions, nominating to spend her time solely with the peasant and her servant, known as Aunt Lin. Today, however, was the day that everything would be made right. Up until now, he had restrained himself from crushing that damn peasant, for fear of arousing Chu Chen's ire. But with the new star tournament starting tomorrow, she would be far too preoccupied to pay any attention to her new favorite, thus allowing Fei to act with impunity. Patiently, he waited for the man to get a good distance from the manor before lifting his hand and waving forward, signaling for the half-dozen men waiting behind him to take action. These were his father's elite guards, each one of whom was a body refiner whose cultivation far outstripped his own. As formidable as that peasant was, there was no way that he was going to prevail over so many of them, and the thought of the upstart's upcoming demise brought a cruel smile to Fei's lips. His smile faltered as a sense of unease suddenly seized his heart. It took him a moment to pinpoint the source of the impulse, but then he had it. The guards had not acknowledged his order. Just as he was about to turn around, someone laid a hand softly on his shoulder and whispered into his ear,
"Lord Ko, my lady has a message for you."
Immediately he recognized the speaker as Aunt Lin, and while the words had been spoken without any hint of malice, they still chilled him to the bone. Being too terrified to actually face the woman, all Fei could do was continue looking forward and force out a reply.
"And what might that be?"
My lady wishes you to know that she would be most put out if anything unfortunate was to happen to Mogun, and she is sure that your lordship shares her concerns.
The words were spoken in the same soft voice, but the hand on his shoulder tightened, making the threat behind them clear. Once more, Fei forced himself to reply.
"Please inform the lady that I share her concerns, and assure her that I will do everything within my powers to make sure that our mutual friend is safe."
As the words left his lips, the pressure on his shoulder instantly disappeared. Yet even so, it took Fei a long while before he could muster the courage to turn around. And when he did, the sight that greeted him made him wish he hadn't. All of his elite guards were slumped on the ground, and when he looked closer, he could see blood seeping from their mouths, noses, eyes, and ears.